Hey everyone, hello, hello, hello. Welcome to the Gamasutra Twitch channel. My name is Brian Francis. Thank you for joining us slightly on the later side today compared to our normal starting time. I am playing an interesting little game called Outcast Second Contact. This is a remake of the game Outcast, which came out in 1999. And down in the lower left-hand corner, you might be very interested to know that we have Franck, getting your last name right, Sauer,
Hi.
who worked on the original game and helped make the remaster happen now.
Hi, Frank.
Yeah, and this is sorry,
Everyone.
and this is Alex. Also, he shows up sometimes.
Yeah, hey, what's up? Thanks everybody for joining us today.
Yeah.
We are a little late because Frank was very kind to join us from his place far away from where we're based in California. And we are looking at Second Contact because I was just so fascinated to see a game that's nearly 20 years old get not only sort of an HD re-release a couple of years ago, but in this, what we're playing now, a full kind of remake. Frank, can you, first of all, I think our audience will be curious to know who you are, what your career has looked like, and then maybe we can talk a little bit about how you came to work on this project and bring it back from the dead.
Okay. Well, I've started my career as a graphic artist on the Commodore 64,
Nice.
so back in the early days. And I got hired by Ubisoft as an artist at some point with my friend and colleague Yves. And then we, at that place, we met with Jan. So the three of us have been together for quite some times now. We started working on games on the Amiga at that point. Then we made we started an arcade company, and we worked on several arcade games. Mm-hmm. And then at some point, the arcade went down, and we wanted to go back to the consumer market. And so we created Outcast on the PC. That was in 1995, so it took us 4 years to make that game. And then we went on consoles and different projects. And we always wanted to go back to Outcast because we had a sense of unfinished business because the game had some real potential. But, at the time we had some problems with the configuration of the PC that was required because it was a CPU game only at a time when graphics cards were coming in. So we tried to remake that game for a long time, but unfortunately the rights belonged to Infogrames, then Atari, and it was quite difficult to get the rights back. And at some point we did, and after trying an unsuccessful Kickstarter campaign, we turned to our current publisher, Big Ben, to help us making this remake.
So there's a lot to dig into there in terms of Outcast design, what makes it interesting, sort of what stuck with you over the years and what you wanted to sort of tweak and fix. I think maybe we could first start by talking a bit about, I'm just very curious to know what the process was like to get the rights back. I don't think we've mentioned it, but you, the development team is called Appeal, right? And I think you're also, if I look this up right, you're also involved in the engine company that produced the engine for the first game. So I'm just curious to know, how did what was the process of trying to go back to Atari all these years later and try to get the rights back to a property like this?
Well, Atari itself was a very complicated company because, it was Infogram at some point, and they had some financial issues. So what we did was contact them on a regular basis, just to let them know that we wanted to get those rights back. But at first, the price tag was just incredibly high for us, So, but at some point, Atari went into some troubles and had to sell their assets, which made sense for us to step in, and then we got the deal at that moment.
Nice. Let's talk a bit then about why you thought it was so important. And sort of what I'm sort of dancing around here, what I want to get into is this game's design, which in my limited experience has been really interesting to study. So, for example, why did you think Outcast had something worth bringing back to the game industry in 2017? What is it about this project that's stuck in your mind for all these years?
Probably because of all the fans. There were many, people talking about the game and the fond memories they had about the game. There was also at some point some kind of unofficial remake. So we always thought that with a more modern rendition of the game, it had some potential. The other thing is that, remember, in 2000 we tried to make a sequel to the game at a time when Atari got in trouble. So we still had some unfinished business and some unfinished ideas, and the plot for the sequel was already there in our mind. So it was really frustrating for us that we could not do the sequel. So the only way to start a large project like Outcast 2 could be in the future was to convince some financial support that we could reach people with the game, and remaking the original game was mandatory, because no publisher nowadays would throw money at someone to start a AAA game or something. So it was a path that we had to follow in order to fulfill our vision for the franchise.
Well, I know it's a bit early. This game just came out, I think, yesterday or maybe today. This week, certainly.
Today.
So has you don't have to share numbers if you're not comfortable doing so. But I'd be curious to get a sense of whether this launch has gone in accordance with your expectations, and if you think it's a good sign to a publisher that you could embark on a sequel attempt.
I don't have the numbers right now. And as a matter of fact, I was away from home most of the day, so I just know that at some point we were second best sales on Steam during the day. So yeah, the early signs are pretty good. I have no ideas about the console sales at this point. We'll have to wait for the numbers, but it looks okay.
Yeah. No, and speaking of the actual game itself, it's been really enlightening to go back and take a look at this. Even as it has been remade in this sort of new format. Some folks in chat are sort of just reminiscing about this game, and someone in there, Ninja Dodo, mentions that they think the game was very far ahead of its time, and I kind of wanted to sort of dig into that a bit. Already on this stream, we've seen Bryant talk to some of the alien creatures, and they have this thing where. If you're looking for somebody, you can ask them where somebody is, and some random dude in the wilderness will tell you, "Oh, I saw him to the west of me a long time ago, and he's pretty far away, or he was angry, he was going somewhere." And that all appears to the player to be relatively generated, and yet it's acted, and it's interesting, and it's accurate. And I kind of wanted to get your sense of how much of that is being done sort of programmatically in the engine, and how does that whole system work? I just found that very fascinating while playing through this morning.
Well, it's based on a systemic system, so effectively there's a common knowledge for all the NPCs, and each NPC has also its own state and behavior. I cannot comment too specifically because I'm not the programmer on this project, but it's something that we wrote in the original game. So that's really something that was already there, and that has been thought as the core game. Mm-hmm. How could I say the core mechanics of the games, and I think that we at that time in 1995 when we worked on that game, we were not looking at other games. We were just imagining some things that we would have loved to play or loved to do, and we just did it. There was no there was there wasn't that much literature about game design and stuff. So we had to invent, and we just go ahead and made the things that we love to make, and there was no deep thinking process about what the others were making or anything like that. So we were making the games with our guts, and we just did what we loved to play at that time.
Yeah, it's very interesting. I think anyone watching who hasn't played the original should realize, this game, the original came out in 1999, and Brian and I were talking before the stream about what else came out in 1999, and there weren't a lot of now. Most big games are open world in some sense. There weren't a lot of what you might consider open world games in 99. Like GTA 3 didn't come out until I think 2001. I think 1999 was the year of Final Fantasy 8, Gex 3, stuff like that. So it's really interesting. Yeah. Right, yeah, that was the year that The Matrix came out and The Phantom Menace, and then we just had trench coats in all our games and bullet time for 3 years. Yep. But no, it's super interesting to see this game now with so many things that we now consider to be elements of traditional game design. Right, it's a big open world. You can go anywhere and do anything you want. You can talk to a bunch of people. There's crazy side quests and weird things you can do in the environment. Let's talk a little bit, Frank. If you're not comfortable talking about the programming, sort of what did you contribute to on this game? What was your role while putting this game together?
On the original, I was more like a art department supervisor. Mm-hmm. I did some. We were a rather small team, even for the time. We were 20 people working on the original game, mm-hmm. And so we didn't have highly specific work. We shared a lot of things. So I did some models, I did some textures, I did the original demo assets to convince Infogrames at the time, and also worked on animation and various things, but mainly just managing the team, the art team, basically.
I'd be curious to know what your intent was. I'm looking at the character designs now, the world. It's got a very lush, low farmlands feel, almost like rice fields or something. And the aliens have this very, I don't know. What was your inspiration for designing these characters, the hats and the outfits? Where did you look to?
It's a very interesting process, because it all started with an early prototype. You know that the environment was made out of what we called voxels at the time, that weren't actually real voxels, but it was more like a hate field. And the constraints were that we could not make any shape. We had to keep the convexity of the shapes in what we were making. So I looked at different inspiration pictures, and it came to me that a rice field would fit with the constraint of the technology. So that's funny enough, but it started with the idea of the rice field, and then the characters came because we had the rice fields, and from there we built that village and those things. So it's strange that sometimes the technological constraints drives the design, especially in the early days of development, and especially at a time where we didn't have any existing technology that we could use. We had to build the technology and the game at the same time.
So it's been I just lost my whole train of thought. I was thinking about how when this game came out, I couldn't play it personally. I didn't have the technology capable of running it, and I think Bryant was literally not born yet.
No, I was 9 years old, Alex. I was watching Phantom Menace 5 times in theaters.
You're just so youthful. You don't look anyway. But I remember hearing about how it was an open world game built on voxels, and as you pointed out, it wasn't really true voxels as we understand it now. But I kind of want to get your sense of why did the team take that approach? I know you were involved with the engine company as well. What was appealing about that way of designing a game world in 1995?
But it goes back to the arcade days. Actually, when we were working in the arcade, the company that we founded was a merger between the three of us and a microelectronics company. And we worked on 2D games because that was how it worked at the time. And at some point we wanted to move into the 3D world, and there were no polygon accelerated 3D as we know today. And we looked at various papers, technological papers, and we found some papers about voxels that were 3D pixels. And we thought about building an actual hardware to handle those voxels. And after some discussion with the electronic guys, I said, "Oh, look at that! He's got a bunch of people around him."
You came to the wrong neighborhood.
Wow.
Hey, buddy, I need to go find Zio. Where's Zio?
So we wanted to create a hardware that was just not feasible at the time. And so the true voxels were really something out of reach at that point. So we fall back on the idea of creating just a height field. So basically, instead of 3D pixels, it was more like tubes. And with those tubes, we could create some nice terrain. And it all started with that idea.
Nice. I was surprised when I booted this up that how different it looks from the original. In quite an impressive way. I mean, like it looks like a modern game in many ways. But I wonder, like, I assume you're not using the same engine that you were back in the 90s. I'd like to know a bit more, if you can, about the process of bringing this game to a new engine and bringing it over and sort of like revamping it to look the way it does. What was that like? What engine is this running on, for example? I should probably know that, but I don't.
Okay, that's basically the original game running in the background. So the actual C++ original code is running. And what we did is we replaced all the visual related aspects of the game with the Unity engine. So there is a plugin, which is the original game, which is running inside Unity. And then on the Unity side, we did all the rendering of the environment and the characters and all the new heads-up display and stuff like that.
Nice.
We also added some collisions, more refined collisions on top of the original ones handled on the Unity side. So it was a fun development because we had something to start with, and we had to remove the part that we didn't want to keep one by one and replacing those with the new technology. And regarding the environment, what we did was to generate from the original data set. We generated some kind of polygon soup with all the stuff that were in the original, and then we used that as a base to rebuild the new content, the new assets.
How did you decide what to keep and what to replace? Like, Brian and I noticed that the voices seem the same, but the opening cutscene is different. Like, what was the thought process behind that?
It was basically down to the budget that we had. We were a very small team. We had originally planned to make the game in 1.5 years, and it ended up to be 2 years. And so we knew that we had to replace the environments and the characters and most of the animations. And but we always had this in mind to try to minimize the effort in order to stay within our budget while maximizing the output, which is what you can see in the actual product. So yeah. I'd be curious to know then. Oh, Brian, how you doing?
Oh, yeah, I was going to jump in with a question if unless you have more questions about art.
No, I want to hear how you're doing. What's up? How's it going?
I'm doing pretty good. I'm having a good time looking for stuff. I'll get comment more on what my current experience is in a bit, but I wanted to say, Frank, I feel like there's a lot of ways that this game explains game design conventions as things that are part of this alien culture, like games, the Gamsav, the original trial you go through, like your essence. These are things that characters talk about and reference pretty regularly. I wanted to know, did you where did that inspiration come from, and do you know anything about how that process took place to sort of tell players about the game through this alien, the way these aliens live?
Yeah, the idea was to not disrupt, not interfere with the immersion of the game, and trying to incorporate within the world of the game all the utilities that you would find in a regular game. So then I think. I'm not sure. I don't recall exactly who came up with what ideas, but I think that Douglas Freeze, who worked on the dialogues, came up with a lot of ideas on this side, and I think specifically the Gamsav was his idea, and we thought it was pretty neat to integrate that. Of course, it was a bit slow. That's why we made it faster in the remake.
Yeah, this is something that I haven't really personally experienced yet, but I read that the way the Gamsav works, I'm sure Brian will use it, is the character holds it in his hand, and then you have to actively hold it for a minute, and it lights up and makes a noise. And I read that that noise will alert the enemies if you're nearby.
Exactly.
That's such an interesting thing. There aren't many games these days that I've played that attach risk to saving, right? That's fascinating. It creates the idea for the player that they have to get to a safe space before they can save,
exactly.
But they can technically save anywhere. I don't know.
Exactly.
That's super neat. I think that's cool. I've been fascinated to watch the way the AI responds to noises and motion and things, and we'll see it maybe if Bryant runs into an enemy camp here. I guess you probably can't speak a lot to that if you were mostly working on the art side. Bryant, do you know where you're? I'm sorry, I got distracted by the. I got distracted by this conversation that you're having with this guy. I'm sorry. So someone in chat is asking a question that I'm just going to steal because I sort of lost my train of thought there. Roberto Mafra wants to know. They see a lot of the Division influence in the interface of this remake, and they just want to know: is that a coincidence or is it like a real choice?
Sorry, say again, about what?
This person sees a lot of influence from Ubisoft's The Division in the interface of this remake. Was that on purpose, or is it just a coincidence?
We wanted to make a clean and more modern rendition of the interface. Who I think is going to be stuck there.
Wait, are you serious?
And we looked at many modern interfaces to try to make something really clean and clear. I think that maybe The Division was one of the inspiration for the interface. Yes, but the idea was to make something very clean, very clear. Also to emphasis on the technological aspects of cutters, items, and stuff, as opposed to the organic world that he's visiting.
Wait, okay, yeah, serious question. Am I stuck here?
No, you can get out, but it's hard.
Oh, okay.
Gotta try.
Okay, got it. Okay, continue. Sorry. All right.
Yeah, no, I think that I was struck by how what's the good word for this? I guess how good the UI is. If you prize UI that feels holistic and I guess maybe the term is diegetic. The idea that the UI is part of the game world in a way that's believable and consistent with the fiction of the game. It's really neat, and that was sort of a nice little touch. I would
made it.
Yeah, boy, we should not watch Brian play this game. It is tricky to have a conversation. Yeah, so someone in chat mentions, Frank, that they feel like many sci-fi game worlds have no soul or do not quite work. This is Or Twin B writing. For them, Adelpha felt like a very consistent universe, and that's why they're a fan of it. And this is something that maybe we can touch on based on your background, sort of, helping out with the art and direction and design. what was the team's process in trying to like craft this sci-fi world? Like, where did you look to for inspiration, and how did you sort of go through the process of building this thing from the ground up?
Well, as I said, we really were not looking that much other games. We all were fascinated by sci-fi movies and series and stuff like that. So we mostly looked at those as a source of inspiration. Some also on the comics side, European comics. Then we had some of our artists sketching up some ideas on paper, and then we really took the time to create the things in 3D and try them out. And what happened several times was that we changed the story or the gameplay according to the new ideas that we had regarding the environments or the characters. So it was really an iterative process. It was not like all design on paper and then build up. It was really iterative in that sense.
I would be very curious to know also, while I was playing, I was reading about Appeal. As far as I know, the team is based in and around Belgium. Is that right?
Yeah.
So we don't get an opportunity to talk to many game developers out of Belgium, and I'd be curious to know
because there aren't many.
Right. Yeah. So like, if you don't mind being put on the spot, like, what is it like to be a game developer in Belgium? What is the game dev community there like, if anything at all? What's the culture like?
Well, it used to be thriving at the very early 8-bit times during the C64 period, and then many successful developers went away. They moved mostly to the US or so. It was really a matter of circumstances that we stayed here because we had some opportunity to continue working here, and we never stopped working from here. Now what happens is that with the internet we can work even from home, and so our current team and for this project we basically all worked from home. So it's we had a central server, but everyone was working on his own setup, which is very convenient. It poses some challenges, and I'm not sure that if we go for a full-fledged Outcast 2 that we can continue working that way. But it's very interesting. It's a very interesting process. Also, some of us have different jobs. Like I'm teaching part-time, so it was important for me to be able to stay in the area.
Nice.
Otherwise, there is another great developer here in Belgium, but it's a very small country, so we have big countries around like France and Germany where development is thriving as compared to us. But it's not that much a problem nowadays, I would say.
I don't want to put you on the spot here, so it's okay if you don't have an answer. But I'd be curious to know. Brian and I have been talking to developers from around the world on this channel. Recently, we talked to someone who works out of Germany. We talked to folks who are on little islands out on the Pacific coast of North America. And I'm just curious, do you feel like there's any bleed through, any expression of Belgian culture or like anything of that in this game? Like, is there anything that is to use a trite phrase, like uniquely Belgian in the design and style of Outcast?
I don't think so. I think
good.
I think the Belgian way is a mixture of all the countries that surrounds us, because as we are a small country, we don't have a very strong identity, except maybe for French fries and mussels and chocolate.
Sure. Someone in the chat says beer. You have excellent beer.
Exactly.
And Bruges,
but for
Bruges
instance, The guy who wrote the dialogues for Outcast is American. We had some French, Canadian, from all around the world in the original. So I think it's a mixture, and again, I think that we watch, we all have Netflix or whatever these days, so it's I hope it's a global culture.
Yeah, absolutely. And to be clear, I think that's one of the beautiful things about the way the game industry works these days is that you can work from anywhere or most anywhere, and you can work with all kinds of people, and you can make anything your mind can think of. That there's no need to make something that's tied to your local region. But after talking to some developers who are very proud of their local game scenes and sort of proud of their local flavor of game dev, it's always curious to sort of check in with other parts of the world. Brian, I totally rolled over your question.
You're rolling over me here like a Rolling Stone. I didn't make a joke land there. I just wanted to comment on some stuff in chat. Jay the Real commented: Il faut aller sur Gamasutra pour voir du respect de regard de jeu fondateur d'un genre, la différence entre les pros et les amateurs mainstream. Jay, thank you. I just wanted to show off my French, however terrible
Excellent.
it is. And I wanted to say thank you for... that actually weirdly brings up a question. Jay is sort of saying that this is one of the foundations of the open world genre. I, to be completely blunt, had not heard of this game before. Do you know if other game developers have how far this game went among other game developers, and how it may have influenced later works like Grand Theft Auto or Assassin's Creed or some such?
I really don't know. You'd have to ask them.
Yeah, we would, but it's interesting just because you have a game. This is more commentary than question. I just think it's interesting. Oh no, I can't get out of the water. I think it's interesting to have a
find
game.
the steps.
Yeah, I see steps over there. I think it's interesting to have a game that demonstrates so many interesting open world ideas that developers are still experimenting with. We were talking to the team behind, one of the guys who worked on Elex the other day, which has a faction system that kind of reminds me of this game. And it's interesting to see other developers trying to make that idea work from games that are from so long ago. I guess I don't want to go over there. I want to get to that temple. Guess I'll just keep running.
You can drop some marks. You have some tools that you can drop, and then you can recall them later to transport you to those places.
Oh, cool.
But you have to drop. Yeah, you have to drop one of those in the village, for instance, and then later you can teleport to that place.
So it'll teleport me back here. Okay.
It's like magic.
If I drop that. Okay, cool. Well, I am not quite working on a teleporter right now. Don't need to teleport, but apparently people are saying Cutter has some Tintin in him because Appeal worked on a game inspired by Hergé's Tintin at one point, right?
Yeah. Correct. That's a very, very troubled period. It was when actually Outcast 2 was canned. Infogrames had some participation in some shares in the company, and they told us, okay, they couldn't stop the company, otherwise they would have to pay a lot of wages and stuff because they had shares in the company. So what they did instead is said, okay, we can continue with you if you accept to buy back your shares, and we will offer you the opportunity to work on the Tintin game. So we said okay, and we started working on it. But then later we realized they didn't have the rights to do that Tintin game, so it was canned also. But there's still a prototype somewhere in one of my drawers, a PS2 prototype of the Tintin game. Yes.
Oh my god!
Nice.
I'd love to. I don't know. I kind of love to see what that was like at one point. I grew up with Tintin comics, even though I was in America. Quicksilver says their name is Roy, one of the hosts of Outcast Universe. They want to congratulate you, Frank, and everyone else at Appeal.
Thank you.
And oh, geez, what's going on here?
Probably dropped a mine over there or something.
Are you an enemy? Are you a friend? You don't look. Oh right, I'm looking for dynamite anyway. For us, I should talk to this guy. Ragnarol would like to know how fruitful was it to dig up the original source material for this game? You're obviously working with the source audio, right?
Well, we had all the original files regarding the game code and the art assets. We also had the original Red Book audio for the music, but we didn't have the original CDs recordings for the voices. So that's why the voices are still the original ones. We did some cleanup. We did what we could to clean up the files as much as we could, but they were compressed, so that's why the sound is not top-notch in terms of the dialogues. But for the rest, we had all the original source files, so we could start from scratch, recompiling. We had to debug the original C++ code a lot and recompile it, and then from there we built the new assets and the new code on the Unity side.
Nice. It's been nearly 20 years since this game originally came out. You're now releasing games in a much different, at least it seems like a much different marketplace. I think what's interesting about this is, one, I mean, you've been making games since the 80s, so I just kind of want to know what your perspective is on what the indie game market is like these days, and just the game market in general. And I kind of want to know, like, are you concerned at all, like, about getting this game out in front of the right people at a time when there are so many games coming out every week?
Yeah, well, to answer the first part of your questions, I think it's really, really different, and it's much harder, especially for the younger generation, to release and sell their games. I mean, it was so easy at the time. It was hard technically because you didn't have anything. You had to code in assembly and put pixels with a joystick or whatever device you had around.
Right.
But once you had your game, it was easy to sell it because people were just craving for games, and there were so few developers around. Nowadays, when I see the number of games on Steam, is just mind-blowing, and I just don't know how all these people can make money out of that. But anyway, it's different. It's easier to create something, but it's still hard to make something that stands out. Regarding our release, yeah, we are a bit anxious about it because Outcast 2 is at stake, and we really want to make it. But otherwise, we totally understand the comments that we see. It's an imperfect game. It's been done with the budget that we had. I don't think we could have done much better within our time frame and our budget. I think it's pretty good for what it costs. And we totally understand that it's not on par with modern game, but that's not, I mean, our goal was not to be a competitor to Assassin's Creed or whatever. It's a game that is respectful of the original spirit, and what we just hope is that it's good enough to have some interest from the newer audience.
Yeah, I was going to say, you clearly have a devoted fan base. I mean, many of them are here in chat right now, singing your praises, and that's a fantastic thing, I think, for a dev team to have. I wonder, how did you try to go and get this game in front of new people? Did you go ads? Did you rely on sort of Steam placement? Did you go to YouTubers at all? Like, how did you try to get this game in front of people that might appreciate it the second time around?
Well, on our side, on the developer side, what we did was to try to modernize a certain number of things in the game to make the pace a little bit faster, like the bullets and the AI and the UI and stuff like that. On the marketing side, on the distribution side, on the you have to ask that to our publisher. I know that they have made some effort to try to put the game in front of as many people as possible, but it's a crowded market, and we have some very big releases from our bigger competitors. So it's hard to have some visibility when you are a smaller game and a smaller team. Yeah.
Mm.
I'm going to just comment real quick. I love the way that the scale of this zone plays out. Like the flow of it and this kind of like maze-like structure that goes around the center of the island, where right now I'm navigating around to try and figure out some quests. This is really impressive, how it's not just like... It's one thing to say it's impressive that an open-world game, was doing this, but way back in the day. It's another thing for there to be this very coherent structure that you can study and see how it shapes player direction.
The fact that at that time the game was actually a 2.5D game.
Yeah.
We built the whole game from the top view using tile systems. So it helped because you could have a gut view of the entire game, and probably it helped to create something coherent on that front. Now we have less constraints, but sometimes it can be more messy if you do that the wrong way. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's funny looking back at this game. It got some awards and sort of praise as the best adventure game of the year from some media back in the 90s. And like when I think of adventure games, I think of like Curse of Monkey Island. Like I think I do not look at this game and go adventure game. So I just kind of want to know, in the 90s when the idea of open world games as a genre was maybe less common than it is today, like what did you imagine this game as being?
Again, we looked at movies, and we were fans of Indiana Jones and stuff like that. So what we wanted for the player is to be immersed into a universe and has his own adventure. So in that sense, that's what we called an adventure game. Now, when you do an adventure, you encounter some opponents. So there's a fighting game, obviously, that comes along. So that's why we ended up with a mixture of various genres. It's because we didn't want to create or to work in a particular genre. We just wanted to have an adventure in the widest possible sense, and that's why it's a combination of all those genres. And it's been very difficult for the marketing team at that time to sell it, to find the right tagline for what was that game about. And I mean, nowadays it's easier because there's been so many things tried in between, but at that time it was something difficult.
Has it gotten easier or harder to market games, do you think, since then?
To market games?
Yeah. To try and like put a game in a box. Like the idea that an adventure game, like just that category at all is kind of silly. But yeah, we have it still for some reason. Just like open world games are kind of silly. Has it been easier or harder to sell this one this time around?
I think it's a bit easier because the players are way more educated and they know all those genres. In 1999, and because there were not many 3D games and certainly not many open world 3D games, it was tough to sell the idea. Yeah, I think players are not dumb. They really know. They maybe people don't like to be put in boxes. I don't know why marketing tries to put the games in boxes. It's maybe because it's easier to sell. I don't know. I'm not a marketing expert.
That was a metaphor, I think, on Alex's part.
Yeah.
The actual in boxes was not.
Although sometimes you literally are putting games in boxes. Yeah, I want to scroll back a minute. There's a nice comment in chat earlier that I meant to get to, and I think we glossed over it. It's from Ninja Dodo again, and they just pointed out their favorite thing in the game is that they think basically no other games do, is that characters point at things when they give directions.
Yeah.
Is that part of the same system that like helps them decide where things are when you're asking about it? Like, that must have been tricky to get models that orient and point in a specific direction towards a thing.
I think it's down to the fact that it's the system that drives the AI, so it wasn't very difficult to integrate that into our system because each NPC knew what was their surrounding, so it was just, what would you do if you knew you had a character in that direction? You would point at it. So let's just do it. So we didn't have to explicitly create something for that. The system was already there.
Yeah, it just makes sense. It occurs to me, you worked on a lot of games after Outcast, sorry. I want to know, like, how did making this game shape the way you work on games today? Like, what lessons did you take from this process that you applied to future games you continue to use in your work?
That's a tricky question.
Excellent.
We certainly learned a lot about the processes, especially handling very large projects, because it's huge in terms of the quantity of assets and large worlds, and how to. You also learned how to manage the constraints of the platform. Because when you do a small, say, an indie 2D games on a PC, well, I wouldn't say it's a piece of cake, but technologically it's very easy because you have a huge processing power to drive a very small game. But when you have to do a large game within the constraints of a small platforms like the PC was at that time, you learned a lot, and now I think that we at least we learned how to handle the complexity with that project.
I'm sorry, I'm going to ask a gameplay question here.
Do it.
Sometimes we have to reveal how bad we are at games. Where's this destroyed boat that I'm looking around at all these boat crossing points trying to find this ruined boat where the dynamite is? Do you have any idea?
Where is the?
I'm looking for the boat, where the dynamite's being held. I was told it was by a ruined boat, and I understand these boats, like, and the crossings they make across the river.
Oh, I think it's on your left side, but it's quite far. It's behind those big rocks that you see over there.
Oh, okay, cool. So I just wander around the island for no particular reason.
Oh man,
video games.
That reminds me, the fans of the game will know this already, I'm sure, but I was surprised just to get a note early on in my playing this game from 1999 that there are like convoys that you can stop in the game to like affect the state of the world and the state of the enemies. And that's something that I feel like it's pretty common in open world games today, but it felt new when it started coming into Ubisoft games and stuff like 5-10 years ago. And Outcast had it in 1999. That's remarkable, and it's interesting that this game in so many ways foreshadowed the direction of open world game design in general. I wonder, as we sort of come to the end of our hour, like, is there any advice you would give to other game developers who are looking to sort of tackle a project that's bigger than they maybe have the means to do? Like, is there any advice you would give to devs who have ideas for things but maybe face significant challenges in making those ideas a reality the way Outcast seems to have done?
Well, I'm not sure if I'm the right person to give advices, but
no pressure.
It's so dependent on the context that it's really difficult to give you a clear answer. I would say that maybe stick to your don't look too much at what the others do in terms of ideas and universes and look and feel of the game. Just look at how the others do in terms of technology and implementation and optimization.
Yeah, no, it's fair, and it's hard, right? I can't even say, what would you say? What would you tell young Frank, right? Because young Frank was making games in the '80s, and it's much different now. So it's like, it's a shot in the dark at best. I'm just curious, what do you teach when you're not making games?
I'm teaching history of video games.
Ooh.
And real-time 3D graphics.
That's like quite a mix. I would be curious to where do you think the history of video games begins? This has nothing to do with Outcast, but I'm just like genuinely curious. Some people say Space War, but then you can go back to that. Like
it actually goes back even further to what we call pre video game ideas. That go back as far as, if I recall well, it's 52.
Yeah.
When a guy had this idea of creating an interactive radar system for launching virtual missiles against some target. But then I'd say that it really began with the Magnavox Odyssey, which is the first commercial video game consoles in 1972. But my course of history of video games is not really just about the games, but it's also about the industry, and to explain to the students what are the milestone in microelectronics, in projects, in companies, the people behind those projects who really built the industry. It's not just a collection of games.
Yeah, I totally agree. It's always really interesting. I was fascinated to learn about, like, you're right, even in the 50s they were using oscilloscopes to make little tennis games and stuff, which is sort of fascinating. We kind of got to wrap up. Brian, do you have any questions you want to get in before we close out?
So I'm going to invite the chat to really quickly get their questions in.
Yeah, I mean, so far everyone in chat has just been basically saying very nice things about this video game, which is nice to see. We don't always get that kind of goodwill. I wonder, Frank, what happens if this doesn't do well enough to merit greenlighting an Outcast 2? Like, what else do you do if you don't get lucky enough to work on the Outcast franchise? You don't have to think about it. It's
I guess it will be business as usual, as we say. It will be maybe we will work on some work for hire, or continue to maybe to teach and do other stuff. With when you are not working in a large company such as EA, Ubisoft, and so on, as an employee, you really have to be agile and take the opportunities as they come. And we've been doing that for years now, and it's okay. There's always opportunities around. So I hope it will work, but it's not like my life depends on it.
Good.
So
it's a good place to be at. Some folks in chat are just saying hello. You have an old student saying hello, and then somebody on behalf of the Legacy of the Yods team says hello and congrats. Oh, this is a good question that we should have thought of. Ninja Dodo pops back in to say, real quick, how did you develop the Talon language?
We started with very basic stuff that we wanted the AI or the NPC to look more alive, and we wanted them to to share messages because it was required for the system to do so. And then we thought, but if they exchange messages, why not do that out loud? And so we came with very few words at the beginning, and from there we expanded the language. And some fans actually expanded the language even further, and we've seen some documents with extra words and sentences that they created to expand the language. But it really came down from the systemic system originally.
Nice. There's a bunch of other stuff in chat that's all very good. We should probably be wrapping it up here.
Yeah.
Thank you all so much for sharing your thoughts.
This is such a cool reinvention of an old game, and it's cool to see that it could still work in this year. Like, it's still fun, it's still interesting, and it's still worth checking out. It sounds like we have a lot of Outlast fans in the chat, but I will just say, if you if you're new to the, or not Outlast, Outcast, excuse me.
Yep.
Sorry.
It's okay. Me too.
If you haven't checked this game out, it's now available on Steam, PS4, and Xbox One. I think it is time to wrap things up. Thank you all for watching the Gamasutra Twitch channel. I have been Brian Francis, and joined by Alex Waro and Franck Sauer today. This is Outcast Second Contact. We invite you to check it out and see this very sort of retouched up look on an old way of making games, and see some of the stuff that it's just a very different interpretation of systems today that we think is common. Other than that, we would appreciate it if you clicked the follow button over there, because if you do, you'll get notifications when we're going live with other game developers. We're talking to the folks behind AIR, which is AER, tomorrow. That should be a good chat. I hope you all come out for it. And we've got some other great interviews lined up, so we'd appreciate it if you did that. Frank, if they have a question for you about game development or about making this game, where should they contact you?
They can leave a question on my website if they want to.
Yeah.
It's francksauer.com.
Yeah.
It's a very good website.
That's maybe the best place to do so.
Yeah, sweet. So I encourage everyone who wants to know what life was like when this game was made to reach out to Frank, because he's had some great things to say today. Frank, thank you so much. This game is cool, and congratulations on getting it out the door.
Thank you very much.
All right. For everyone else, have a nice day. Bye.
Bye-bye.